This video will show you how to do an R script and an R Markdown script. We're going to look at two different files. The first, what you're seeing here, is the corn.r script. The second one is the corn.rmd, or the R Markdown script. The code is exactly the same in both data files, but we're going to step through each of them to see how different they are. Let's start with the corn.r script. These are data from the National Agricultural Statistics Service. What we have here are corn production in Minnesota from 2014 to 2018. One of the first things that we'll always do when we load RStudio is to load the tidyverse. So if this is your first time using RStudio, you'll want to run this line of code, install.packages tidyverse. Once you've done that, then you can load it with the library function, library tidyverse. So you only need to install a package once on your computer, but every time you use a package, you need to load it using the library function. And so we'll do that here. We'll highlight it and we'll click run here, and that will run that line of code. And you can see it spits some output out here. Perfect. Now what we're going to do, starting on line 14 through line 20, is we're going to enter the data. And so we have three data variables here. We have the year 2014 to 2018. We have the area. This is the area of corn harvested in Minnesota for grain. And it turns out this is in 1,000 acres. And then we're going to enter the yield. How many bushels per acre of corn did we get in Minnesota for each of those years? So we can make new variables using this simple C function, or what all R calls the concatenate function. And that basically just lumps together all the data that we want. And so to run these lines of code, we can highlight everything and click run. Now, many of you probably have noticed that it tends to run everything that's written out here, but it doesn't run anything that starts with a hashtag. And so if you start any line of code with a hashtag, it won't run. It will be basically comments that you can make in your R file. So you can see here in the environment, it added our three variables, area, year, and yield. That's perfect. We can also create new variables. And that's what we're going to do here when we look at the total production. We're going to take the area times 1,000 and then multiply that by the yield. And then we can print out what PROD, or production, looks like. And so here it spits out all the production numbers from each of our 5 years. So going down the list, the mean yield. R has a function called mean, which allows us to calculate the mean. So we can highlight that and click run. And it turns out the mean bushels per acre for the last 5 years is 182. Well, it's nice that we have these three variables in our data set, but we want to combine all of them into really one data set that we can work with. We'll call that data set corn, and we'll use the data.frame function to add them all together. And so we're going to make a variable year that's going to equal year, the other variable we already created, and the same with area, yield, and production. So we can highlight these lines of code and hit run. And now you can see here what we have is really a small data set to start working with. The year, area, yield, and the production value. We can also see that if you go to the environment window in the upper right, and you can click on the little spreadsheet icon. Here, if many of you are familiar with Excel, this looks more like a spreadsheet. We have the years listed, the area, yield, and the production. And that opens up as a new tab in your RStudio window, and you can close that tab. Now that we have our data, we might be interested in plotting it. And so here we're going to plot the yield over time. And so time, or year, will be on our x-axis, and production will be on our y-axis. To do that, we use the ggplot function. And this is a function that comes directly from the tidyverse library that we loaded earlier. The data set we want to use is called corn. Remember, we just made that data set in the previous step. And then we want to say, R, we're going to be doing some aesthetics. We're going to have an X and a Y value. We're going to map some aesthetics. And so we'll say AES, and then in parentheses, X is year, Y is production. And then we've told R and ggplot what to plot, but now we want to say, okay, what do we want to plot? We can plot points, we can plot lines, we can plot bars, and lots of other things. So we can do a plus sign at the end of the line, and then let's do a point, what we call a geom point. So it will look like a scatter plot. So let's run that line of code and see what it looks like. And so what you see here is in the lower right in the plot window, we get the trend. So it looks like the total amount of production peaked in 2016 and then has come down at least as late as 2018. And so also when you see plots over here, you can do things like zoom, and that will make your plot a little bigger. And so you can see trends, particularly if there are smaller data points or smaller things going on. And then you can X out of that window. Let's make a similar plot, but now let's look at plotting the yield over time. And so we're going to want to plot the bushels per acre on the y-axis instead. And we're going to do the same thing. We want to make points just like our previous graph, but what if we also add lines between those points? So we can add a geom line statement at the end as well. And so again, we can highlight that code, click run, and we see a similar trend. Yield increases. It looks like it peaked in 2016, but now we've got lines going through our data. And so that's how you might use the R script to calculate, do some, basically entering some data from manually, doing some quick summary. We calculated a mean value of the corn and then plotted it. So that's how you might use an R script in this case.